This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders. When Andy Farrell distracts himself from the fact Paris is no longer a viable holiday destination by inking in the team sheet for Ireland's Six Nations opener against France this weekend, I wouldn't blame him if just through sheer habit he writes the name Jonathan Sexton at 10. The greyest man in green casts a long shadow. For 14 years the hallowed green jersey has had a nailed on number 10, and for 2 full World Cup cycles who dons it next has fueled the column inches of Irish rugby press and nightmares of Irish rugby fans, the entire nation doing that thing where you know your boiler's due for a replacement, you know it's overdue, but you figure it'll be fine, we'll sort it next month, perpetually over and over for 8 straight years until one day Sam Wylock smashes in, breaks it, forcing you to come home much sooner than you expected, and in the cold light of day look at the situation and say, shit, if only we saw this years ago, we'd be fine. But now it's winter and you're without a boiler. When I started this channel, all the references and analogies were about video games and student nights out. Now it's about boiler replacements. What has happened to me? And yet, as we all continue getting exponentially older by the minute, I'll be bald by July, 2 kids who were just 9 years old each when their predecessor won his first cap for Ireland have, as of 2 weeks ago, both hit the age. Bob Sexton was when he nailed down the Irish 10 jersey himself all those years ago. Jack Crowley and Harry Byrne, each 24 years of age, entered this year's Six Nations knowing it's their chance to lay claim to a jersey that tends to let its inhabitants keep it for quite a long while. So, with Ireland's biggest oval circus about to kick off and questions only ready to intensify, how do Ireland's 2 main contenders, Kieran Frawley, play? How easily can they shuffle into their predecessors' very well-worn shoes? And how might it affect the team's performance over the next 8 weeks? Considering he's been around so long that when he started they only had the Good Thursday agreement, it's no surprise Ireland's entire attack is pretty much built to the exact strengths and whims of the man I'm still struggling to, I'm going to manage it, to call Jumbo Bob Sextuple. As such, unless Ireland are about to reinvent their entire attacking game, the entire system, for just 5 games before Mike Catt departs as attack coach this summer, which I'd say is highly unlikely, a huge factor in which player of the pair wears 10 and how well they'll go depends on how well they can fit the shoes and how strong of an impression of Grafgo's fine sandwich salesman they can perform. And it's here that our 2 contenders start to diverge. For my money, Sexton had 2 peak periods over the last few years. One in 2018-19, where he was, for me, the most versatile, capable 10 in the world, able to do anything just on absolute another planet. And another in 2022-23, where age had maybe made his game a bit more limited, but both Leinster and Ireland built game plans so tuned to his strengths that he became the form 10 in the world once more for another 18-month period. His pace was gone, but he remained one of the best live decision makers in rugby. His role became to manage and attack. Look at this passage from the All Blacks second test in 2022. After Archie's initial smash-up, instead of a set second phase move, Sexton spots the All Blacks' backs have gravitated towards the open side, meaning if they swing back against the grain here, it's just the front row getting fresh into line after the scrum, so he calls the ball and does nothing himself, dropping off immediately to Lowe, who crashes it up, trying to attack those forwards. Next phase, he calls for a forward pod here. Tupea has come out here to try and help the props, so by hitting up in the middle, Ireland can divide the Kiwi centres and really easily isolate Fainga'anuku. Sexton calling 3 runners directly on him. The winger gambles on Byrne or Doris and it allows Archie to break down the short side and put Marnie into the 22 for something that eventually results in a try for Andrew Porter. This became the key feature of Ireland's attack. Lots of runners on Sexton's shoulder, lots of short pass options. Maybe it's to prevent the rigor mortis setting in, but with every touch Sexton is fully in motion and yet he rarely goes more than a step or 2. Ireland found a way to make a fly half with no pace, but an incredible rugby brain, a proper dynamic, always moving threat, always something the defence has to watch. And as such, last year when we saw Munster Jack Crowley slot into the same system, it felt rather different. At less than half his age, Crowley still has a very decent burst of pace on him and loves to be a far more active threat to a defender than Jamboree Johnny. This is Crowley's first passage of possession after coming on against Scotland in the World Cup, and while similar to Sexton, he happily bides his time. Once he does get a touch here, watch the way he takes the ball immediately to a defender, unleashing Archie to carry. Now, the whole "you've got to take the ball to the line" is usually spoken as a real positive of a fly half, but in this case, and in many cases frankly, Crowley's habit of engaging a defender actually allows the defenders outside him to read the play and smother Bundy before he can consider hitting Keenan, who's running a really lovely liners outside that could see him through. Likewise, the following phase, Crowley gives a little stutter to keep the defenders honest, but it allows just 2 Scots to man-mark his options, and the same then the following phase afterwards, where Sexton would give an early short pass as he catches it. Crowley looks instead to add value, and instead adds a chance for 2 Scots to smash Finlay Bealham. It's a hospital ball. And yet, after one short forward carry, we see the benefit to the system. Expecting him to step up and engage, Turner flies up on him. Horn out on the wing, comes up, assuming he'll have time to adjust regardless, and instead Crowley drops it on the boot. It's an inch perfect cross kick for Gary Ringrose to score and kill off the game. This is a try Ireland, I would say, wouldn't have scored with Sex lump at 10. And yet you kind of feel from the situation, with all due respect to Scotland, their old hands still would have masterminded some sort of route to 5 points. And it's the exact same approach, frankly, that Jack Crowley takes to making websites. Where Sexton was always a HTML kind of guy, the younger, more dynamic Crowley instead uses Squarespace. Such an easy-to-use website builder, Squarespace allowed Crowley to construct a site for himself in no time at all, integrating all sorts of videos and features, as well as checking the back-end stats so easily, and he loves back-end stats. Jack Crowley is a back-end stat kind of guy. Really comprehensive analytics available at the click of a button on how many people are visiting, how they're using the website, how many people are buying from his store, and so much beyond. And if you want to do the same and transition from a Sexton-type HTML site to exciting new Squarespace stuff, please head to the link in the description and use the offer code SQUIDGRUGBY to save yourself some money. Neither's approach in that green jersey is inherently better than the other. They're just different players. If we look at how Crowley manages a lengthy attack from a similar situation to the Ireland one against New Zealand from earlier, here against Toulon, it begins with him eschewing another Andy Farrell tradition. It's a pretty common trend these days for fly-halves to linger out the back, hiding behind. So if a move, say, requires a really tricky pass, they've got to throw one pinpoint, really long ball, they're in position to throw it themselves. As most likely the best passer on the team, you want the 10 being the guy to throw that difficult pass. Sexton, on the other hand, rarely rolls like that. It's incredible. If you watch Ireland, pay attention to how few of the big moments are actually on their star fly half. This try against France, most fly halves would be throwing the wide ball Ireland put on Gary Ringrose here, but Sexloop trusts his teammates and expects the exceptional, probably because he knows they're all afraid of him bollocking them. So the 10 only throws the tiny short ball, the easiest pass in the entire sequence, instead of the really tricky one, which helps prevent France from reading it. If a team's best passer is waiting in this kind of position, it's pretty easy to tell they're looking to throw a massive wide ball, and when you know that, it's so much easier to cover that, have someone watching low, have someone watching the passer. Ireland take that luxury away from France through personnel choices. Crowley, on the other hand, loves to take everything directly on himself. This move requires one difficult pass, and Crowley himself flings that long ball. Zebo able to get out wide before the Toulon defence and crosses the gain line himself. Next phase, Crowley then invites Byrne to crash it up directly, allowing him to wrap around and set up an attack on the far side, calling a shape, except winger Calvin Nash just spots something on the near side and makes a call. A wise call. Craig Casey notices this and opts for Nashville, with the team moving forward even though Nash can't get the pass away. Instead of stopping and calling a shape, a la that elderly flappy arm man, however, Crowley swings round to the short side to see what's on and engages Nigel Lavery before spinning it out to the world's only 25-year-old, I'm pretty sure was born in 1971, John Hodnett. Crowley clears out himself and Nash calls a shape with Anton Frisch slotting in at 10. This is something we've seen Ireland do often. Lowe, Hansen, Ringrose and Keenan all slotting into organised shape and call patterns whenever the geriatric 10's back was playing up or whatever happened. Munster keep pouring forwards and Crowley gets himself back involved, slotting into Nash's called shape and selecting a runner before sitting back, happy for Casey to take over. The scrum half manages things until eventually, after bashing away at the line for a long time, the call comes. Nankerville hits a great line and dives under the posts. This lines up perfectly with how Sexton played on that earlier example. Once Ireland get into the 22 through the Omani carry, they generally let the 9 call the shape rather than the 10 and then manage the play. Gibson Park running things until Porter eventually gets over the line. The fly-off not touching the ball once in that period. Jack Crowley's time with Ireland felt a bit like a younger Jonathan Sexton, playing a game plan devised for himself as an older man. And that's why the thought of what he can do when given a proper run is so exciting. Where old man Sexton liked to sit back in his armchair and manage the game, Crowley's a much more livelier, flashier, more engaging player who loves to take things on himself and feel the pressure being dropped onto his shoulders. Byrne, on the other hand, timing green has been perhaps a bit more limited thus far, seeing less than an hour of action over just 2 caps, the most recent them in 2021. But for Leinster, he's generally given something much closer to the experience that his old man predecessor was giving before, albeit still somewhere in the middle of the 2 approaches I've just been discussing. Harry Byrne is an almost robotic rugby player. Part of the unbelievable Leinster system, where Crowley's constantly looking to express himself, Byrne's focus is always purely on execution, on the team. Having been the prodigy to Mr. Sexman at Leinster, Byrne's ability to call shapes and organise pattern is pretty exceptional. Like his mentor, he's just happy to sit in the middle and throw the easy bits the team around him can click into gear and excel. However, whilst Crowley might be the favourite to be inked into the team, one area that might give Byrne an edge is simply how familiar he is with not just the Leinster heavy starting 15, the players around him, but the tactics Ireland play, because they are so goddamn similar to those deployed by the D4 flash mob. Actually, frankly, it is almost pointless to drill into what impact Byrne has on the attack because it feels so much like a slightly watered down version of Sex Towel. The lead up to this try from the other week, finished by the professional rugby player Jordan Lama, sums it up beautifully. Byrne just calls a succession of simple crash-up phases, stays in motion long enough to attract defenders out of line, but not to let anyone shuffle on, a la Crowley in the earlier example, before trusting a teammate to throw the really key pass from deep. Leinster break down the wing into the 22, and after a few phases of faffing about when they get down there, they do eventually look for a miracle ball, but Byrne doesn't call for it. He calls for Gibson Park to miss him and get it right out to Lama, who goes on and scores. It's a succession of seemingly minimal touches that creates a beautiful end product and gets the most out of his teammates without Byrne necessarily doing much other than barking for where he wants the players to be. It's not like Crowley can't call the shape himself. This from the other week's KG match against Northampton is fantastic and exactly the kind of thing Andy Farrell will be looking to see. It's slow ball, but Gavin Coombs makes a great read, and Tyke Byrne, and this is a sentence I'm going to say a lot over the next few weeks of the Six Nations, does an exceptional bit of dirty sneakery, grabbing Courtney Laws and driving him into hooker Landon, bowling him over and meaning the Saints guard is off their feet, and much like Claudia Winkleman's hairdresser, nobody is touching the fringe. Crowley spots this and calls a shape instantly on the fly. It's as though he's the head of a pod here, with Nash and Lockman around him, and Hodnett hitting the line outside. However, as Davison drifts across from Northampton, Nash breaks off the pod and works into the gap Byrne just created last second, hitting the hole Laws and or Langdon would be filling if they weren't driven off their feet. Crowley times the pass perfectly, and after George Furbank, hey! Welcome back to the channel, Lieutenant Furbank, we've missed you. How we've missed you, George Furbank. Makes a card-worthy tackle. Oh, welcome back. Crowley flashes in and does his thing, taking position late and delivering a lightning-fast touch, almost creating an overlap. The attack eventually dissipates, Furbank goes to the bin, Munster tap, Crowley then bides his time. It's another simple but wonderfully called shape. He has 5 options here, and there's a pretty good chance that anything but going himself results in a try. He opts to pass to Frisch, who scores pretty easily. The core difference is when Crowley calls a shape, it's usually one where the fly half is a active role, is a flashy part of it, where when Byrne calls one, the 10 is simply unlocking the door, not trying to step through it. To use an analogy that Lewis Rees-Zammit might understand, Crowley likes to be the quarterback, Byrne to be the coach. And Ireland, like Leinster, love to let the 10 call the shots instead of actively pulling the gun. However, the short passes, intricate moves and crisp handling speaks for itself, but perhaps the most significant area of similarity between Leinster and Ireland is their kicking game, especially when put next to how Crowley plays with Munster. As a more attacking, handling-centric team than forward-based Munster, Leinster kick the ball significantly more often. The Leinster idea, as with France, New Zealand, Toulouse, et al., all the best attacking teams on the planet, is to kick in order to put the opposition into situations where they kick it back to you, giving you the chance to counter-attack or line up against a more disaligned defence than you get off scrum or line-out. As such, when they do thump it, Leinster kick long. Their average kick this season is around 38 metres long, almost identical to Ireland's stats during the World Cup, with both teams regularly kicking from wide positions as such, as it forces the fullback to come up and allows you to turn it and put it in behind them, leading to a more hurried, harried clearance. As such, very little of either team's kicking, but particularly Ireland, is actually carried out by the fly half themselves. This here is a list of how many passes on average a selection of fly halves randomly chosen from last year's World Cup through for every kick they made. Sengtum's number is an unbelievable outlier, but demonstrates Ireland's tactics perfectly. Lots of little passes, kicks coming from other players in wider positions in order to make more ground and put the fullback under more pressure. In fact, despite playing just 59 minutes to Sexton's 301, Jack Crowley actually kicked the ball more times at the 2023 World Cup than his first choice counterpart. And this is reflected in how he plays for Munster. Crowley's club sent almost all of their kicking through 9 and 10, and generally kick much shallower. They average about 20 metres per kick, not a million miles off half of Leinster's total, as they want to pressure the opposition, try and force errors and slowly creep up the field, instead of opening that bastard up. They kick much less, they kick the second least of any team in the URC, but when they do, it comes off 10. And fascinatingly, this is something we saw creep into Ireland's game when Crowley took the field during the World Cup. The response beaten into Crowley at club level, when his team is going nowhere, they hang a Springbok-style cross-field bomb, and we saw him do the same thing in green without the team necessarily there to follow up to chase, to make the most of it in the way Munster or South Africa can. Sexton hung just 3 of these kicks over the last 2 years, all of them against Wales, the team statistically least likely to run it back, hoping to trap them in deep areas instead of necessarily pinning them back to get them to kick back. Crowley resorts to little kicks over the top in the middle of the field, so much easier than either of the Leinster fly halves, past or present. However, there is a third Leinster option out there, because Andy Farrell does also have the choice of Kieran Frawley, a really talented utility back and tidy 10 in his own right. Frawley is a fantastic player, but even more of a gamble, having started at 10 just 4 times in as many years. However, what he might lack in settledness, he more than makes up for in settledness. One of the best system players in the world, able to slot into any role in the team so cleanly. When he plays as a fullback, he plays as the perfect fullback that Leinster want. When he plays as 12, he plays as the perfect 12 Leinster want. When he plays as a 13, he plays as the perfect 13 that Leinster want. And whilst he has less game time at 10, he's still very capable of playing there. And with a side as built on executing set structures as cleanly as Ireland are, he might prove a really tidy option, and obviously Farrell's now going to go for him purely because I haven't focused on him as much in this video. All of this makes for a very fascinating selection and a really exciting tournament. Jack Crowley is a really different player to Johnny Sexton. Phew, I managed it. And when given the reins before, he's generally put his own stamp on things instead of trying to do that impression of Sexton I talked about earlier, where Harry Byrne has done a brilliant job at club level of being Sexton but not Sexton, providing the same subtlety and excellence in game intelligence, albeit with a smaller gob and a little bit more pace. Crowley's greater experience probably puts him in pole position to start, yet it likely forces Ireland to make changes in how they play, whether Farrell likes it or not. In just a few days' time, therefore, Andy Farrell heads to Paris for likely the final time for 2 years, knowing whatever decision he makes has kick-started a new era of Irish rugby. For one of 2 young men has no choice but to finally be the man who steps out of that long, grey-green shadow. Thank you for watching that. I really hope you enjoyed it. This is the start of our big Six Nations nonsense for the week. We've got another one coming up. Will's had a look at France, what they'll be like without Antoine Dupont. That'll be coming up for you second half of this week, Thursday, Friday-ish time. In the meantime, there's a bunch more on the channel. I look at Louis Summit the other week and him going to bloody American football. And then when we start the Six Nations, as I kind of made the announcement last year, we're not necessarily going to do it in the format we've done it before over the previous year's Six Nations because they were exhausting, take a lot of time, a lot of stress, and I've spent a lot of Six Nations weekends, which used to be real highlights of the year, having quite tough mental health times trying to get through it and trying to kind of big myself up over the last few years. So we may do some of the match reports. We probably are going to look at that first game, the Ireland-France game, in the usual style, but we might take on some different stuff, and we'll do plenty of, stuff up here on the channel, but it won't necessarily all be in the formats we've used before, just as a kind of announcement, I guess. Otherwise, I hope you're well. I hope you're having a good rugby, and I will see you soon for more rugby.
Just please, Johnny, don't be scared. I will come back on.